Hello everyone, and welcome to my second review on this channel. The first one was over a month ago, whoops, but hey, at least I have an excuse, that being that right as I was getting ready to record this review, I got a pretty nasty sinus infection that put my voice out of commission for 2 weeks. And right as I recovered, finals week ended up suspending these reviews even further. So now it's mid-December and I'm finally getting around to this review, so my bad. Anyways, today I'm talking about the debut album from Karma Fields, New Age Dark Age, released on March 2nd, 2016 on a little EDM label called Monster Cat. I think this is one of those albums that's more remembered for the lead up to its release rather than the actual project itself. I mean, I still vividly remember the podcast hack incident that was used to tease the first single of this album, catching me and everyone else present on that live stream completely off guard. Karma Fields would later prove to be one of the label's most controversial artists back during 2015 and 2016, largely due to their experimental style and how Monster Cat would, at times, be a little excessive in promoting them as an artist, or at least that's how it was seen at the time. But that being said, I've seen some people genuinely hold this album up as one of the best in pretty much all of electronica, which, spoiler alert, is something I disagree with, but am ultimately unsurprised by, mostly because of something I'll be discussing when I get to reviewing a certain other album released by a certain popular artist in the year of our Lord 2014. So with that all being said, I think now's a good time to get into the track list. The first track, Edge of the World, opens the album in a very ostentatious way, beginning with an orchestral number led by a somewhat gothic-sounding choir, which cascades into this industrial-sounding build-up, kind of evoking the idea of some historical site or monument getting torn down to build some factory in its place. At least, that's the kind of thing I envision when listening to this. We get some stuttery synth pads signaling the oncoming drop, and it happens exactly when you'd expect it to, with those synths now taking center stage. It's a very inoffensive drop, not terribly exciting in concept or execution, but very solid regardless. And much of the second half of this track carries forward in that same way. I'm quite curious as to that final sample that's used during the fade out at the very end of the track, but at any rate, it's a solid intro, I guess. I think the next track on this thing, which I'm about to talk about, would have worked better as an opener in terms of being a mood setter, but I guess Karma Fields didn't really want to throw the listener in the deep end immediately, because that next track is Stick Up, which is a collaboration with Morton, and features vocals from Juliette Lewis, and unlike the previous track, this one seems to try a lot harder to make a name for itself. I'll let you decipher whatever meaning you want out of the lyrics of this track, but they do objectively serve as the driver behind the song's progression. Stick Up is a lot darker and a lot heavier than the album's opener, given that there's basically no melody in this track whatsoever, and maybe that's why I think this track would have worked better as an opener. In terms of how much I like Stick Up, though, that's a little more difficult for me to say. My opinions on this track have definitely become more moderate since its initial release in late 2015, and having really gotten out of the EDM bubble over the last 2 years, I've gained myself a new appreciation for the emotional release this song provides. That being said, those lyrics will never not catch me off guard, and this track's overall repetitive structure keeps it from being better than decent for me. From Stick Up, we land in the third track, For Me, which is much lighter in terms of tone, but still shares some of the same heavy sound design from Stick Up. The tonal transition is unmistakable, though, and that's probably the reason that this slower, more synth-pop-esque take on this industrial sound that Karma Fields presents with this album is a fan favorite. It isn't until we get to Skyline that things start to really lighten up, giving the listener a bit of a break from the grittiness of the previous 3 songs, especially with those atmospheric vocals. Although my primary criticism of this track is that it runs a little too long, especially due to the fact that it basically repeats the same melody and chord progression over and over again for nearly 5 minutes. Then again, it is a pretty damn good melody and chord progression, so I guess it's not too bad. From Skyline, we're thrown back into the industrial grind with the track Fixed, which has another great chord progression and industrial drop, but the real highlight here is the build-up. Karma Fields knows how to do build-ups. They are probably the greatest strength of this album, and the greatest weaknesses of this album are when the drops or choruses that follow them end up disappointing me, which does happen at least once, but not here. The following track, Greatness, another industrial hitter comparable to Stick Up but with rap vocals and way more decipherable lyrics, is, well, actually pretty great. Although I haven't always felt that way about this song, mainly because of the vocals, but the sound design on this track is probably heavier than Stick Up, comparable to Kuro's 2019 Bad Habits EP, although I'd say Karma Fields did it way better here. We then move on into Scandal, which, it has good production, is similar in tone and structure to Greatness, and I guess Stick Up too, but, those vocals, they're, quite interesting. This is easily my least favorite song in this album, primarily because of how uncomfortable those vocals make me. And if you've listened to this song like I have, you probably know what I mean already, so I'm just gonna move on from here. I mean, it's a nice trip-hop song, but those vocals kind of ruined it for me. Let's just move on. Up next is Build the Cities, which is the track I alluded to earlier when I said some of the worst moments on this album are when the drops that Karma Fields provides aren't able to live up to the spectacular expectations of the build-ups that preceded them. This track has the best build-up on the album by far. Sometimes I'll go back to this song just for the build-up, because when the drop hits, I just get kind of sad. I mean, it's not terrible, it's a Moombahton drop with the main melody as a single industrial bass lead. It is, admittedly, very catchy, but every time I come back to this, I just feel thoroughly underwhelmed, and honestly, I feel like this could have been a lot more. The final 3 tracks on this album are all at least pretty decent. Skewed revisits the glitchy and stuttery electro sound of the opening track Edge of the World, but pulls it off a lot better in my opinion. Faint Echoes has some great vocals from Monarchy and some great breakbeat drops not too dissimilar to Fixed, and wraps the whole thing in a very synthwave-esque vibe, sorta like For Me. And then, A Bright But Distant Future, as you can probably tell from the title, closes the album on a bright and optimistic, but also very repetitive note. I mean, the song literally consists of 4 chords being repeated over and over again for 4 minutes, along with a lead melody that's present for like 60% of the song. So yeah, this album is nothing if not a little repetitive, and that can make this whole project, as well as the marketing behind it, seem a little pretentious to say the least, although I will say the vocals to come with the singles on this album are pretty nice, especially the ones we got with Build the Cities, Skyline, and Greatness, although the integrated video was a bit of a letdown. New Age Dark Age definitely showed that Karma Fields had potential, and they would go on to make brighter things in the not-so-distant future, but I personally think this album was definitely a little overhyped, and continues to be somewhat overhyped. I mean, the more I think about it, the more I realize that those encounters of people claiming that this is one of the greatest albums ever produced were probably anecdotal, unlike a certain other album that I'm going to have to review soon, which this review is heavily foreshadowing, but that didn't stop even me from feeling a little let down when this thing dropped. It's solid, and my thoughts on this album are overall positive, and don't get me wrong, there are bangers that don't suffer from these issues that I've mentioned. Tracks like Skewed, Faint Echoes, Edge of the World, and Fixed, for example. But if I had to pick whether this album was a new age or a dark age, I wouldn't end this review on such a cheesy note. I'm giving this project a score of 9. That is not a 9 out of 10. The score in that scale should be displayed on the screen, and if you're curious about the scale I'm using to score these albums, you can check the description. I hope you enjoyed and or appreciated this review, and I hope to see you all in the next one. Take care.